Hello, my name is Cory Endrulat, and I'm making this video to be a critique, a criticism, my comments and concerns, or tips of advice for the common law assembly or anybody related to Anna von Reitz's works. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to go over in this video is Anna von Reitz and my particular critiques of her. Now, before I get into that, let me just say nobody's perfect, right? I'm doing this as an accountability measure, as somebody who also studies a lot of knowledge, does a lot of research, or even internal research into the world around us. Okay, and Anna von Reitz puts out a lot of good content. She's been doing this for a long time. And due to her great dedication and work, there's thousands of articles. So of course, if you want to nitpick, you probably can. If you want to look up a certain subject, you can on her website. And in case anybody thinks I'm anti-Anna von Reitz, no, I'm not anti-anybody. And again, nobody is perfect. What I did was, I went on her website and I looked up different subjects that I am familiar with. And I brought them to light. I got a stack of papers here that I printed from her website. So everything I'm going to present here is from her website, from her articles, and you can look it up for yourself if you want to confirm it. Okay, I will be reading some things from her, and again, just offering valid, just honest, plain, nice criticism, because I don't have anything against her. I have a video interview that I did with somebody who's part of the Common Law Assembly on my channel. It's about like 35 minutes long. Check it out. It says must see Common Law Assembly interview, and I even have a page on the Nature is the Answer website, nita.one/assembly. Okay, so that's nita.one/assembly, and you'll see there's a bunch of resources about common law, including her own website. So I definitely support what they're doing, and I think it could definitely help in the efforts for freedom. Absolutely. But there still are things we have to understand. We cannot just settle back and say, okay, we got it all figured out. This is how the world works, and this is how the job needs to get done. It needs to be done through this set way of doing paperwork and correcting our political status and changing our political status, etc. It is more than that, and I'm going to demonstrate that in this video. So let's start with the first article that I printed. Again, this part I'm going to go over is Anna von Reitz and her critiques. Okay, then after that we'll get into other things about the Common Law Assembly in general. So this one is called Key Information. Everyone must read this. And it says, lately, the alternative news world has been awash with talk about human rights and natural law, and quite a number of people have been misled about this and are promoting it as the next great thing. Now, this was a couple years ago. In fact, it is old as the hills, and nothing you want to be involved in, much less subjected to. Let me explain and bear with me. And so she goes into different aspects of law. But it's interesting how she says, oh, well, it's as old as the hills and nothing you want to be involved in. Okay, now, just keep that into account because I'm using her own words, okay? Let me see if I highlight anything else in this document. Again, I have it all printed out. I read it all. All right, good information. Here we have on the last page some conclusions. So, bringing it at all full circle with regard to human rights and natural law, ... And then I have another part highlighted. As for natural law, that is another name for law of the jungle, wherein the strong are allowed to mercilessly prey upon the weak, and the only tooth in the claw prevail, and only the very fleet-footed escape. Okay, so she's equating natural law to law of the jungle. Let's go into the next one. Okay, we got mortgage fraud, political status and law, or stop being stupid, part 15. Okay, there's a lot of writing, which is good. I definitely appreciate that. And she addresses most people's concerns, which is also good. I'm not sure if she's necessarily aware of a lot of the information I talk about. But that being said, that's why I'm here, and that's why we're all the American people. We all have a voice, and we all have to share it with each other. I would say human beings in general. Here we have a quote. Some people have tried to invoke what they call natural law as a substitute for the law of the sea, but a closer examination reveals that this is just the law of the sea transplanted onto the land, popularly called the law of the jungle, or tooth and claw law, which enshrines whoever is biggest and strongest and most fit to survive, and which is in fact worse than the law of the sea because it is less developed and remedy is limited to whatever the victims can enforce all by themselves. You might as well give the parties to a complaint a set of clubs and call the judge a referee. Okay, so that's her thoughts again on natural law. Again, we'll reflect on a lot of this. So she's saying that it's the law of the jungle. It's chaotic, There's no order in natural law, which is interesting because my shirt literally says law is king, right? With the Justice Tarot card. And here we have the next one. Dear Greg, in response to your response. All right. What did Greg say? Let's see. What did Greg say to Anna von Reitz? Let's see. I have quotes again that I'm taking from this because there's a lot of text. Self-governance is not merely an idea promoted by American founding fathers. It is a law of nature. Oh, okay. Well, that's a totally different view of natural law, is it? And every single time we ignore the laws of nature put in place by our Creator, guess what happens, Greg? We fall on our noses and fall and fall and fall and fall. Okay, so if we follow the laws of nature, it's chaotic, it's law of the jungle, and then if we follow the laws of nature, it's, it's order. We don't fall and fall and fall. It's self-governance. It's what the American founding fathers promoted. Unless, of course, you're differentiating laws of nature from natural law. But you'll see that she doesn't say laws of nature here in the very same article. It says, oh, wait, sorry, there's a really good part to this. How about three laws total? Oh, wait, there's even more parts to this. Holy moly, this article is full of them. We are meant to rule ourselves by conscious, logical, reasonable discernment of truth about ourselves and the world around us. But we can't do that when we are constantly lied to by entire organizations posing as churches and governments and universities in the literal business of lying to us for their own self-interest. Now, it's interesting how we kind of differentiate the government versus the people. What are the government? They're just people, are they not? But we believe that there's something more than just regular people. So you can say that we already rule ourselves by conscience and logic and reason, but we don't necessarily use it. And that's the difference. We're putting it in some other people's hands, these governments, churches, and universities, as she's saying. Then she says, the true God, who is the only king, dwells within us. He has and needs no officers, no prelates, no priests. He doesn't play favorites and doesn't follow our instructions. Rather, he instructs us. If we listen in the wisdom of life and truth, totally not natural law, in the way we should go. And he hands us lessons and tests and observes what we do, the same way a loving parent challenges us with new tasks and new skills, but totally has nothing to do with natural law. Now, of course, I'm using sarcasm because if you look at life or truth or the way life is supposed to be intended, is that not correlated to laws of the universe that are guiding human behavior or guiding certain actions, guiding certain manifestations? So then it says, it's time for the whole world to find a new answer and to realize that, as Jesus said thousands of years ago, the true God, our true King, is within us. That puts us in power, right? That's empowerment. So how about this? 3 laws total, Anna von Reitz says. She says, love the true God, the creator and giver of life and consciousness. That's one law. Law number 2, love your neighbors and yourself. And number 3, keep the peace and honor free will. Then she says, and we will toss out the millions, literally millions of statutory laws and codes and regulations, and pay attention, finally, to the natural laws that our Creator established for us instead. And it's interesting that I quote from her, right? Because she can do a lot of great good for the world, And you may look at our founding fathers and say, well, man, they have a lot of good quotes too. And they tried doing something that was really good. But something went wrong. Something along the road still led to some level of tyranny and democide and slavery, ultimately. Which is the world we live in, which is why we have people like Anna von Reitz and Mark Passio and Larkin Rose and myself and others who are trying to educate people and change things. She says, if everyone on this planet accepts and practices these three things, we can have our paradise on earth and eat ice cream too, illuminated by peace and prosperity and an end to selfish idiocracy. And we can all spend our time and money doing something more productive and positive than fighting and struggling to control external governments. So we'll be in control of ourselves. So instead of trying to fight and control external governments, we have to focus on ourselves. Interesting, right off the bat right there, because that tells us quite a lot about natural law, about our nature, about what we need to pay attention to, about even religion, which she also talks about. Here we have an article literally titled Comment on Natural Law and Indigenous Claims. It says, the natural law is that we are all here now, and we are the current proprietors, all of us, black, white, brown, copper, yellow, pink, and it doesn't matter where our ancestors come from or how long ago they arrived on these shores. All these indigenous claims are just more BS and excuses for one group of people to claim a hammer over other groups of people, and I am sick of it. So she's applying natural law in a whole other context here, okay? So we have one sense of, it's the American Declaration, right? The laws of nature and natural law, these definitions put together as one, and then she says it's the survival of the fittest, it's the jungle, and then here she's saying, well, it has to do with the fact that we're all here now. Okay, so maybe we can add that, maybe we can say, well, they're being said in different contexts, but does she ever define what natural law is? That's my question, because, you know, common law, which is this thing that is often used to represent what she's doing, is supposed to be based on natural law, or at least we can say that natural law is the most basic sense of law, and some people want to just cut right to the chase of common law because they think natural law is not law. I disagree, and we can talk more about that. This one says, defined the source of the fraud from the beginning, from Anna von Reitz. It says, those in back of the Georgia Guidestones are deists, not Satanists. They find the whole idea of an absolute evil as childish as the idea of absolute good, and they revel in illusions and fraud schemes that take advantage of our dualistic educational system, using good and evil choices as a means to herd the sheep. As long as we can be suckered in by dualistic thinking, they have ready means to control us. They believe in a God, a supernatural force which orders the universe, but they are not Christian, and they are not aligned with any other major religion either. So, how does that make them Satanist? In philosophy and religious practice and belief, they are closer to founders, Franklin, Washington, and others. Formally, they recognize only two laws apart from the natural laws: the law of free will, stated as, and so long as it harms none, do what ye will, and the law of love, stated as, do unto others as you would have done unto you. Now this is true. I actually have a bunch of books by deists. This is one. It says Reason, the Only Oracle of Man, right, by Ethan Allen. This one is from the 1700s, and I have other ones as well, like this one, Principles of Nature by Elihu Palmer. I even have a documentary on deism. But tell me, what makes them Satanists? And what makes them worse than Christians when they are pretty much attacking Christians? It doesn't mean that necessarily they're against the whole notion of God. And if you look at the Satanic Church, the Church of Satan, Anton LaVey's works, they're openly atheist. They're not deist, they're atheist. Big difference. Okay? Now, there's more problems with that, because the deist also particularly talked about natural law all the time throughout their works, talking about free will and reason and conscience constantly, morality. And again, she contradicts herself from the previous articles that I read, where she talks about how the laws of nature are based on the Declaration of Independence and the founding fathers are promoting this great message. And here she's saying, no, that's not true. They're promoting this, and this is Satanism. It says they are more closely aligned to the ancient Druids than anything else, nature worshippers, practitioners of natural magic, and yes, blood sacrifices of various kinds. Where have the deists done blood sacrifices, or the founding fathers? They are not nice people, but they are very vigilant and serious-minded, and they are enemies of the unsympathetic world religions. They purposefully set the Jews and Christians and Muslims to fighting each other so that they kill off and diminish their enemies. So this is assuming that deism is still around in existence, and that it's taking hold of a lot of power structures today, when the average person doesn't even know what deism is. And you may say it has some Freemason ties and elements, but that doesn't necessarily mean deism by itself is a wrong way of thinking, or that the natural law is therefore invalid, right? Because they're looking at something that's really important, and if they're hiding that information from others, then of course they're going to gain a power hold over others. They understand the laws of the universe. That's a very powerful type of knowledge. So then she goes on and says, as long as the deists are not recognized as a specific, identifiable, known and organized group, they can continue their activities undetected and continue to pit the Christians against the Muslims and the Buddhists against the Christians and the Jews against everyone else. As all these other groups are busy killing each other, the deists are selling arms to both sides and profiting from the destruction of their competitors. Where is she getting this information from? Because from what I understand is that the deist was just a movement in the 1700s, the 1800s that was protesting the church. And you know what? They also got imprisoned for their beliefs from, you name it, the organized religions. They didn't want the deists sharing their ideas with people. And they were very controversial, using satire and humor. So I wouldn't say that they are very serious either, because they did that a lot within their works. And they were willing to address everything. And also willing to come to a common sense understanding of God's existence without the use of supernatural miracle beliefs or using the Bible as a source of evidence for God. They did not rely on pieces of paper to believe that there's a creator of the universe. That's it. That's deism. The motto for deism is that God gave you reason, not religion. What's the problem with that? I want to know. She then says, the deists were heavily represented among the founders who knew that King George was funding both sides of the war. But that contradicts what I just said, where you have the Catholic Church getting involved and imprisoning the deists. And maybe you say that, maybe it's because of the revolution and all this stuff. But of course she's claiming that King George was funding both sides of the war, so that's a whole nother perspective you have to go into. And hey, I'm open to the idea that that's absolutely possible. But that being said, that does not discredit deism or natural law. Okay? And just because the deists happen to be the founders of America does not mean that that represents all of deism. Okay? Because there's many other people who were deists, especially later on, as we'll see. Here we have an article titled Stop Believing. Well, that sounds very similar to religion, doesn't it? We'd rather understand our world through reason, through science, through the laws of nature, rather than just pure belief, pure faith. There needs to be some science behind it, and there is. So, she says, following the natural law that we become whatever we hate and fear. And there we have a whole other definition of natural law that she likes to provide for us. Another example of the fact that I don't really think she knows what natural law is, or at least she can't put a very clear definition on it from her own writings. And maybe I'm wrong. Maybe she knows about it, but she hasn't really fully addressed it in an article. My question to that is why? And why have so many ways of saying this, some good and some bad? Where does law come from? Everything you need to know and we're afraid to ask. Now, of course, I know I have certain ways of wording things, and I've delved deeper into how I can word things in different ways, but my principles have remained the same since day one. Okay, I don't change my mind on saying, well, oh, it's the law of the jungle, and the next day I'm like, oh, it's the best. It's the law of love. I just don't do that. Okay, so here she says the short answer is that all law except natural law, like the law of gravity. So now we're thinking natural laws, physical laws. When before she said it was laws of free will and of love. Those aren't physical laws, are they? She says all law, except for natural law, comes from religion. Some people wrinkle their noses, but it has to be discussed because it is the truth. Modern psychology tells us that about 5% of us are born without a conscience. We call these people sociopaths and label them with various other descriptive names. But the bottom line is that they have no natural compass with respect to right or wrong. They learn what the rest of us consider right or wrong by rote, the same way a dog learns to fetch a newspaper without being able to read it. But they truly don't have a clue why the rest of us consider certain things like stealing, lying, or adultery to be wrong. So how do we get these ideas in the first place? Let's hear it from Anna von Reitz herself. Part of it is natural empathy, which most of us possess. And that has nothing to do with natural law, may I ask? Have you looked at the origins of natural law and looked at everybody who talked about it? Because when you say part of it is natural empathy, right there you're literally saying it's natural law. It's our conscience, our reason, our free will aligning to the laws that we understand within the world, aligning to what actions, what behaviors we learn for ourselves, what we should do based upon the effects, the manifestations happening in the world. If something harms us, we're going to warn somebody else because we have empathy. We don't want them to do the same thing that we did, and therefore it becomes an axiom for morality. That's simple, it's easy, it's common sense. I don't want to see someone get poisoned the same way I did. So I'm going to warn them with the knowledge that that is truthfully not good for your nature. It's unnatural to use. It is technically, again, if you were to use it, a lack of knowledge of nature. That doesn't make nature at fault, it makes you at fault. Here she says, we hate it when someone lies about us or something or someone we care about, so we come to the conclusion that lying is wrong. In the same way, we conclude that stealing is wrong, and so on. Throughout this planet, there is a generalized understanding of what is right and wrong on this basis alone, which is exactly what I appeal to in all my videos and what I hammer down on all the time. But should we take for granted that people already know what right and wrong is? Because they might make that exception in politics and say, well, I know it's wrong to steal from people, but it's okay under taxation. That's a moral issue. She might go into a whole long article as to why taxation is wrong and where it came from, etc. But the very action itself is immoral because it's of the nature of theft. Taxation is theft by its nature. Organized religions have again, generally speaking, taken these basic conclusions and according to their own history and traditions have made them part of their doctrine. This is true, and this is the whole reason why you have deism in existence, is to separate the laws of nature and morality from religion, because not all morality has to come from religion. She claims in some of her articles that all morality comes from religion. Do you see how many contradictions are here? She says, their rules of belief and behavior by which their society is defined and identified. That process has in turn given rise to their systems of law and concepts of justice. It is true that governments and universities, etc., are based on religions. I will not disagree with that. I think there's a lot of truth in that, okay? It's the other parts that I'm concerned about, the parts I have been mentioning. She says, you must reclaim your birthright identity and start organizing your jural assemblies and establishing your counties on the land jurisdiction of the United States. So like, whoa, this is the end of the same article, and we go from talking about morality and empathy and talking about how these religions are turning things into law, and automatically we assume, okay, well, the way to fix that is you have to do this paperwork. Okay. Now I'm not against the assembly and what they're doing, and I'm not even against doing the paperwork. It's understanding that there's more than just the paperwork that needs to be understood. There needs to be a moral emphasis. There needs to include the knowledge of natural law, of justice, the nature of justice, of reason, of conscience, because that is what leads to all the problems and solutions of our world. Is the morality of the populace. It determines the freedom of the populace. As morality increases, freedom increases. As morality declines, freedom declines. We see this throughout history again and again. And there's other ways, of course, of putting that. So she says, you elect your own sheriffs, and you use the citizens' arrest statutes of the United States statutes at large to arrest these judges and others who trespass upon your rights and your property. Which is interesting, because I really support a lot of the common law assembly and what they're doing, because it looks like they're creating a voluntary society. But how quick are we going to perhaps lose that voluntary component of our world if we give authority over to other people, if we are just following orders and not thinking for ourselves what is right and wrong? We're suppressing our conscience, our natural empathy, and giving it to others, saying they have to be responsible for my own rights. That's statism. And from what I'm aware of, she doesn't talk about it. She doesn't talk about statism. And again, she doesn't talk about natural law, especially in the sense that I'm bringing up and even she brought up, but contradicts herself. I'm not complaining, again, about her, just providing critique, accountability. Okay, so you make it your business to bring the law of the land forward. The law of the land, they're usually talking about common law. You invoke the saving to suitors clause of the Northwest Ordinance. So you invoke this piece of paper and worship it as the Holy Grail, and use this piece of paper for this piece of paper and this piece of paper, which some of these are not even ones that you consented to. You return the favor to these vermin. It's interesting, because if she's going to mention arresting, we don't hear this side of the story sometimes. I hope it doesn't get to the point where there's involuntary actions being done, where we feel like we have to do things about these people because they trespass upon our rights and our property. If by trespass you mean violence, if by trespass you mean different forms of violating your rights, because trespass by itself would be a breach upon your rights, then yes, people should act upon it. But should they act upon it using some pieces of paper? No, they should probably act upon it with their common sense, and if they want, bring it to a voluntary court, as the common law assemblies can do, and settle out these disagreements, settle out what needs to be done, and really find out what the solution should be. Should it be written on a holy piece of paper and taken as this is the way everything should be handled? Then no, it's not really looking at the individual case. People are less free to handle their own problems, and you end up creating more problems than you do solving, which is exactly where we end up now, where we have millions of laws and statutes for people to follow, as she even says herself, and people have to follow orders, even though, of course, again, by that nature, you are suppressing your own conscience. You're not thinking for yourself. Then she says, as Mulligan ex parte guarantees, another piece of paper, when you elected your own American common law court at the county level, they can no longer process anyone claiming their natural state national status in that county. I wouldn't say that's natural if it's a status that is man-made by its nature. When you get your state's level American common law courts set up, they can no longer process anyone at the state level either. For them, the game is over, because millions upon millions of Americans will seize back their purloined identities and their property, and these federal franchise courts will be reduced back to hearing actual maritime cases and dealing exclusively with the legitimate federal citizens. So again, a bunch of word mumbo-jumbo by the government political systems that be. And it's interesting because Anna von Reitz also has an article out there, and she's got many articles that I did not print, where she talks about how the natural is very essential to look at. Looking at just the natural. And yet here she's talking about a bunch of man-made things. So interesting. Here we have another article, Comments about Anarchy as a Solution, Unanswered Letters 24 from Michael. So, here we have these questions that people asked, like, hey, what about this, what about that? Um, Here is the very important question. Question number 2. This person asks, in the spirit of the immortal worlds of Emil Durkheim, quote, where morals are sufficient, laws are unnecessary. Where morals are insufficient, laws are unenforceable. Why do you favor the re-establishment of a failed form of government as opposed to anarchy? Here's a link for your edification, and I'm pretty sure this person linked a video by Larkin Rose. And what Anna von Reitz responds to this is, thank you, I grew up reading Lysander Spooner and don't need to be edified regarding what passes for anarchy in this country, but nowhere else. Whoa, hold back. Lysander Spooner is not just a teacher of natural law in the real sense of looking at morality and the laws of free will and love, as she said. He's also a deist because he talks about natural law. So she grew up reading Lysander Spooner. How come she hasn't given us the definitions that he gave us or shared the knowledge that he's sharing with us? Why is that? And why isn't she promoting the deism that he's talking about either? He's past the time of the founding fathers. She says, if we had the morals of an ant, none of this would be happening, because we would be tending to our business and taking responsibility for our actions and requiring others, the politicians and bankers, to do the same. As it is, we want rights without responsibility, and we want someone else to provide us with a government because we are too lazy, ignorant, and find politics too distasteful to do it ourselves. I wonder why. Perhaps it's because, it is unnatural. It's something that people don't want in their lives. They don't want to deal with. And most people just want to live their lives. But they've been trained into believing that they need a system to exist, to be there for them at every step of the way. Like, I need to sign this, I need to sign that, I need to go through them, I need to get permission. Is it legal? They don't ask if it's moral. And legality determines their morality under this system. When they want rights without responsibility, they don't have rights. They don't have rights because rights require responsibility. Rights are a form of property. Any form of property you have to be responsible for, otherwise it's not your property and nobody can tell that it's your property. You have to show that it's your property. Okay, so that's how you protect it. If you got a car, you got to make sure it's working properly. Otherwise it's not a car. It's just a piece of metal that is just sitting there and not doing its intended function. It's not doing its required nature, its function. Its purpose, maybe, right? As you may say. So, the politicians and bankers to do the same. Okay, here we go. And then we act surprised and complain when our public servants, flip the tables and make a bid to become the public masters instead. Because they're not servants to begin with. If you understand what statism is, it automatically gets rid of all these ideas that you're saying, servants, and they're turning them into masters. They never were servants to begin with. If you're giving somebody rights, more rights than you, over your own life, over your own rights, over your own property, naturally, you're creating a master. You're not creating a servant. They're not working for you. They naturally have more rights than you. They can determine, and they could become to determine what your rights are, and then yes, you become a slave, and they become the master, but you set that up for yourself. They're not doing it necessarily to you. You're allowing it to happen. That's what statism is. So she says, well, time to wake up. Okay, what does that mean for her? She says, our government hasn't failed us. We failed ourselves in our government. That's what I just said. Fantastic. But yet she said our public servants flipped the tables, made it sound like the servants did a bad job. And then she says we failed our own government. Whoa, what's going on? We haven't paid attention to it in 150 years. We have left it on idle and autopilot and hired a bunch of foreigners who have sold us governmental services until we are being serviced from cradle to grave. You don't think people have, for all this time, been trying to create freedom and find different ways of sharing these ideas that they think should be done in the world? That's the problem, though, is that very problem of the world is people imposing their will on others, saying things have to be done the way I think they have to be done. Okay? Now, it's different if it's voluntary versus involuntary, because if it's involuntary, then everybody has to obey. by threat of violence. And that's where you have government, a monopoly on violence. So, she says, how about this for a revolutionary idea? We all stop voluntarily paying them taxes we don't owe for services we don't need. I agree, because taxation, by definition, again, is immoral. It's theft. She doesn't say that, though. She says, sounds good to me and practical, too. Why? Because it's immoral. Then, instead of anarchy, we can contract for the public services we each consider necessary. That is anarchy, if you're each voluntarily wanting to get different things within your world. Pay our own tab and realize that the democracy promoted by the United States and its commercial corporations was never our government anyway, and that it is dishonest to the core and has no mandate. So, this might come from the idea of a republic versus a democracy, trying to make a difference between the two, when again they're both forms of government, different forms of politics. If it's voluntary, it's not government. If there's no violence, it's not government. This is something I notice within the Common Law Assembly often, which is this use of the word government in a sense that, it's a different type of government, which is literally every appeal of government in the past to create a new one, right? Every revolution is caused by people realizing, this system is bad, let's bring a new system in. This master is bad, let's bring a new master in. This law is bad, let's bring a new law in. Not realizing the fundamental problem is the very existence of those things. That somebody else should have more rights than you. That makes you unequal as a human being. Okay? That literally creates the system of slavery, as I detail in my book, Slavery Gone for Good. The abolitionists knew a lot about this. Okay, they didn't just tackle chattel slavery, they tackled all forms of slavery as well, many of them at least. Even by its own rules, the corporation calling itself the government of the United States is rudderless and defunct, under liquidation by its creditors, its assets in a holding trust, and what needs to be addressed how the suit is not how we divest ourselves from our responsibility to operate our own actual government, but how do we take up the neglected reins after 150 years. The work that has to be done is empowering people's conscience, is strengthening the will, is raising the consciousness of human beings. Because even if technology were to take a foothold in this world, if people do not have the consciousness in their lives to be aware of what's happening, they will be deceived. The will has to be strengthened. Moral, spiritual character has to be put into the hearts of men. This is why the Common Law Assembly is doing good, because they're encouraging people to research for themselves. That alone, regardless of what they're researching, is empowering for people because it makes them question their life, their living, and their conditions, to which ever grows, depending on these actions that they permit. And if they're permitting actions that rely on paperwork and endless amounts of paperwork to prove that they're free, are they really free? Because they're depending on the paperwork, number one. And number two, it's fine to have paperwork representing your freedom, as I do with this book, but it's also another to know that freedom is simply freedom. It's here, it's natural, it's already with us, and all that's needed is to say no to those who want to get rid of it, and say, I'm not going to let you. This is my freedom. I own it. It's a form of property. I have the right to freedom. That's why my rights are a form of property, and I'm not going to let anybody touch it. That is natural. An animal doesn't come to you in the wild and say, hey, I'm going to sign this contract with you before I, murder you, or let's sign this contract. No, they don't have conscience to do that. Of course, it's human beings who come up with all this stuff because we have a conscience and higher rationality to come up with all these crazy forms of governments and politics, but it's come at our own expense. We've destroyed the human species in trying to create these unnatural things. So we have another article, Cleaning Up the Civil War 150 Years Later, where Anna von Reitz says all that the governments making these fine emancipation proclamations actually did was to change venue from private to public slave ownership, and in this they were entirely self-interested. Men could no longer own men, but governments could own men. So she's literally claiming right there that government is essentially slavery. Now, of course, by her claim, she probably doesn't mean all government is slavery. She is trying to say that we can create a whole new system of government that has never been created before. It's a voluntary system, and I'm telling her it's not government, it's anarchy. The word anarchy comes from anarchon, which means no rulers. It doesn't mean no rules. There still are rules, and that is natural law. That is understanding it. And without understanding natural law or those rules, you cannot get to the world of no rulers. Because by definition, including if you are a slave, you have to give yourself knowledge and understand what you own in order to not be owned by somebody else, or in order for you not to be told what to do by somebody else. You have to have self-sovereignty, self-ownership, self-government. That is the right term to use. But government implies that somebody else is in control of somebody else's life, which they do not have the right to do. So, here we have exactly why you must return home. Another article that goes more into a lot of these ideas, and here you have, you have to take actions against your lawful government in no uncertain terms. And here it is. It says, this is the only way short of anarchy to lawfully enforce the public law and the constitutional guarantees you are owed by these jackdaws. Okay, now I don't even know what that word jackdaws means, I'll admit, but to say that this is the only way short of anarchy puts anarchy in a good sense there, kind of, to say that, well, it's not anarchy, but it's close, because we're close to anarchy, but there still is some law, there still is some order, making it sound like anarchy is just not order by its nature. No rulers does not mean there's no natural leaders or rules that people have to follow. People will make that. Voluntary agreements, you coming up with all these papers and all this paperwork and getting the assemblies together, this is all voluntarily made. This is people coming together with a cause that they feel in their hearts and they connect with through their own experiences. That is powerful, and those are spiritual, mental, moral principles that no paperwork can represent. Here you have Embrace the Place, a message for our assemblies. And again, another article that goes into so much, and this one is even more interesting to me. There's a section on here toward the end. It says, another common misunderstanding of newbies is that they are fighting against the government, okay, people who are joining their assemblies, which they identify as any authority whatsoever. Okay, now she doesn't put authority in quotes. I would put authority in quotes. Why? Because does any human being naturally, morally, truthfully have an authority over another human being? There's no such thing as a thing we call authority in nature. So, she would have to address that. Answer the questions I'm going to put on the screen. Anybody from Anna von Reitz's, Common Law Assembly, etc. Answer those questions and get back to me. I'd like to hear. Years of abuse by the territorial government or the municipal government has fostered a hatred of all government, and these wild-eyed anarchists arrive in our assemblies with the idea that we either join their campaign to wreak vengeance on the perpetrators or we are part of the problem. Are you not wreaking vengeance on the perpetrators by literally saying, hey, you do not rule us, you're not supposed to rule over us? Now, I get it. You want to do things peacefully. You want to say, hey, we're just defending ourselves. We're protecting our assets. We're protecting our rights. We're just exercising what we are. Is that not what anarchists are literally doing if they're saying, hey, I'm free. I have no rulers. I own myself. I need to be in full sovereignty of myself. Nobody should be in control of me. It's the same thing. So why wouldn't you want to accept it? And it's even worse that you have to put in an article and say, beware of these anarchists that are joining these assemblies. The point is that we are not the perpetrators, but an entirely different government, a lawful, reasonable, peaceable government, which has never existed before in the world, by the way, that is formed to protect people and their property assets from predatory commercial corporations and foreign powers. Okay, that's a bunch of words right there. But the point is that, yes, you can defend yourself and your rights. Do you need other systems of control in order to protect your own rights? No, you need responsibility over your own self. Okay, so this is a message for the assemblies, and it's like, oh, careful, these newbies who are anarchists. So now you see the issues here, and it is particularly in her views on natural law, deism, and the lack of mentioning morality, and then also claiming that morality comes from religions, which is a whole other topic, and again, there's other documents she has said, and then saying that, I've read Lysander Spooner, but yet I can't use his definitions for natural law or deism, or understand that there is a good sense of that, and no, deist or Satanist. I mean, these are claims that I do not see have enough validation behind them. And the contradictions, of course, well, that's a whole different story. Now, that's the Anna von Reitz part of this video. Of course, it took quite a bit of time to go through those articles, and that's just some, but that's all the ones that I could find, particularly on natural law in particular. And so, again, let me just stress and come up with some conclusions here. Okay, and I have a little bit of notes here that I'm going to read off of, but she wants to use legality and documentation rather than reason. Okay, rather than us learning from the world for ourselves and realizing that we have to be free because it is natural for us and it is the most moral for us to do, we have to use documentation in order to show it. Now, if it allows us to contribute less to the system now and less contribute ultimately then to violence now, I'm all for it, and that's why I'm a part of it. That's why I'm in the assemblies. And I'm just a fellow human being and I'm trying my best to do everything, why not do it? But why not also then be accepting of the anarchists such as myself who are joining the assemblies? Because do I have bad intentions? Another thing she does throughout her articles is she equates anarchism with communism and Marxism and socialism. I'm sorry to burst your bubble, but not all anarchists are socialists, Marxists, and communists. They can be, you know what, and it's okay if they do want to, because then they can live in their own society freely, without violence, doing so on a voluntary basis. And it's different from imposed communism, this is the way it must be, let's back it by violence, because that's what governments do. So I'm actually okay with anarcho whatever, so long as it doesn't harm anybody and doesn't violate the rights of another. But, of course, there's also anarcho-capitalism and other forms that may probably appeal to you because it isn't communism and Marxism and socialism, and guess what? That's anarchism. So anarchism, however, in totality, in reality, without all these string attachment words added to it, just means, like I said, no rulers. So don't correlate it to communism, Marxism, or socialism. They're not the same. Okay, now again, she supports Lysander Spooner, yet doesn't understand natural law and demotes deism and anarchy, because Lysander Spooner was also an anarchist in the real sense. Again, not communist, not Marxist, etc. Then, again, she claims that morals come from religion. No, I'm claiming they come from natural law. We can understand the world, our reason, our human nature, and understand why people do what they do and how they look at the world around them to learn for what they should do. And that is their subjective mind, their free will trying to align to that objective, determinable source of knowledge. Okay, and that's an intention within the universe. That's a purpose they're trying to find. Then, you can. Here's the main deal. This is the main thing I want to hit home in this video, is that, again, you can use paperwork to represent all these things and say taxation is bad because blah, 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 blah. But you could just say because it's immoral. And morality, violence, slavery, or if it's voluntary, these should be the 4 things that are mentioned within the common law assembly. I want to see it talked about. Now, do I put all the blame and say Hannah has to be talking about these topics and she has to be talking about it? Well, I hope she watches this. Maybe people within her network watches this and they start contributing to that knowledge, or they start looking into it for themselves and they start not discounting natural law but looking into it. I'll put resources in the description below, including Lysander Spooner's own document called Natural Law, or The Science of Justice. That doesn't sound to me like Laws of the Jungle, does it now? Okay, another thing is she mentions this idea called rebuilding America, but does that rebuilding America include taxes? Because if not, again, it's not a government, and if it's voluntary, it's not a government. If there's prisons, then you can say, well, maybe there's some parts that are questionable, but generally in a free world you would see all sorts of solutions popping up and people would be free to create many more solutions, and the market will also do a great deal. This is where the anarcho-capitalists come in, but I don't like to use those terms. But everybody's going to contribute, and that's great, and knowledge can be spread, and there's no censorship, and certain ideas and certain people and certain authority positions taking all the responsibility for everything. No, you're obligated to be responsible. Oh, well, who will do this about this, or who will do this about this? Well, what are you going to do? You just going to sit there and do nothing about it? You don't think the businesses are going to want the roads paid for as well, for their own transportation of goods and getting their customers? And so this is the conversation that needs to be had is in anarchy, because it is reality, it is nature. But do they see it as that, or do they see that as some sort of ideology, something that is not attainable because it's chaotic and is unorderly because we've been taught to believe it's chaos? But could you believe that we would equate freedom, which is, again, self-sovereignty, nobody controlling you, okay, no rulers, that's anarchy, freedom and anarchy together as one, and we would equate that to chaos. So we're saying freedom is chaos when actually it is order. That is the deception. That's the biggest deception that we've been kept from, is our own understanding of our own nature, and nature itself, of course. Okay, so am I hard to understand when I just simply talk about morality? Am I hard to understand? I want you to look into the common law stuff and tell me which one is easier to understand. You have to know all these acts and codes and documents, or you understand, oh yeah, what is right doesn't cause harm. Oh yeah, what is right produces the right results. It's something that doesn't create any victims. It's something that there's lists and lists of rights. There's only 7 wrongdoings. Murder, assault, rape, trespass, coercion, willfully lying, right? And yet, the rights. Well, I have the right to life. I have the right to drink this cup of water. I can do that because I'm free. I don't need a piece of paper that says, yeah, Cory, you can drink this glass of water, and this glass of water is determined by this document, and the water is determined by this document. I don't need the documents to prove something that is so natural and essential to this world, and that's why we've denatured ourselves and ultimately lost ourselves in every way possible. So, looking past the use of licenses, etc., these are just pieces of metal. Okay, so these are just pieces of metal and pieces of paper. They don't matter. They don't matter in the grand scheme. They can represent things, but they should not be seen as the authority. These are man-made things. These things can't have authority, same way human beings can have authority, only you can have authority over yourself. These things are forms of creativity to represent other ideas. Okay, so just understand that. Like, I fully comprehend this is just a book, a bunch of pieces of paper. It's what the book represents that matters. It's what people perceive of that book that matters. Is what they learn from that what matters. But ultimately, it's just a medium between them and the natural world, right? This video is a medium between you and the natural world. And you're choosing to watch this video to learn more about your nature or the nature of the world. But you could just go in the natural world yourself. I made my own observations. I put them on paper. Maybe it can make it easier for you. I'm an educator. I'm a teacher. I'm not somebody who's a legislator trying to tell people how they should live their lives. I have views of my own. Some of them are my opinions, and I respect that, but I'm not going to impose that on others and call it law. That's the difference. But how many people are going to look under the voluntary slavery, violence, or morality of the situation? Again, these 4 topics go unmentioned often. Okay, they can be more often at least, because they're not entirely unmentioned. There's a reason why we're doing what we're doing, is it not? So, papers to show your freedom. What if they change these systems or make it harder? When are you going to draw the line and say, I'm just going to say I'm free, I'm just not going to do it? And enough people know this knowledge with me, we're just not going to do it. There needs to become some point in time where people just stop obeying at all. They'll give any credence or legitimacy to any authority other than yourself, your own nature, because only you can belong to you. Only you belong to nature, right? So it is easier to say you are free. It is not so easy, in my view, to fill out all this paperwork, but yes, okay, they're making it easier for people. It can help you less contribute to the system, so I am a part of it. I'm doing it. But I'm going to go the extra mile and go the full way. It's one to start on the path of truth and another to go all the way, as the Buddha would say. Because it is true. You have to understand what is truth itself, and that is not determined by books, papers, Bibles, what have you. Okay? And so, the final thing I want to do for this video is look at a chart. And this chart, which I'm going to put on the screen for you, is called The Way Power is Supposed to Flow in America. This is one that the common law assemblies share with people. And again, I have nothing wrong with these common law assemblies. I'm saying this knowledge, this education needs to be shared. The knowledge of natural law. Okay? It says in the back of my shirt. I want you to read it. It says, government is a problem, right? Slavery is the problem. Government is slavery. And justice is understanding right from wrong. The scales of justice. Creating order out of the chaos. The chaos that is manifested because people are ignorant. They're in fear because of the systems of control, of government. That's psychology. That's morality. That's mentality. It is not paperwork. You can say all you want that they turn this person to a corporation, but that person is also in fear of disobeying that authority. You cannot disregard the other aspects that make up that system. Yeah, there was a fraud that they didn't know about, that they did not consent to. Well, what about all the other things they did not consent to? All the things that they're fearful and the servitude that they have within their own minds that they need a master. That is statism. That's mental slavery. And that will keep creating the same condition over and over again so long as people believe it. So that needs to be focused on just as much as morality, violence, slavery, and voluntarism, which is the same stuff. So let's look at this chart, the way power is supposed to flow. The people on the top and the Fed at the bottom, because the government is our servant. But if they're our servant, if it's voluntary because we're hiring them, then it's not a government. It's completely voluntary. If somebody doesn't want a servant, then they don't have to. So they're not stuck in this pyramid system because they don't have to. They can disobey. So it's anarchy because it's freedom and they can do whatever they want. They don't have to have any rulers. They don't have to be part of any city or state. They're part of their land. They're really on the land. They are embracing just the land. They might not even say, yeah, I own this piece of property. It belongs to nature ultimately. Not to say that there isn't such a thing as property. There's such a thing as labor. And yes, working hard and saying, yeah, I'm going to live here. I need somewhere I can survive. There's differences. There's differences, but and people should be free to manifest the life that they want to live. But to say that this is the way power is supposed to flow is to say that we still need some sort of government because they're stuck in this pyramid system, even if it's at the bottom, even though they're putting them on top of their life or on top of their needs. It doesn't make sense. If the people are really in charge, then there is no government by definition because nobody's mind is being controlled. Gervano mentis means mind control in Latin. Okay? And I'll put a slide on the screen for that. It's clear that self-government then would be self-mind control. You in control of your own mind. Governing yourself, your own life. And therefore, if it's self-government, then what is government in relation to that? It's not important. It's not actually essential. And then yet people equate self-government to democracy. Yeah, democracy is just majority rule. It doesn't help anybody. So what is the point of this structure? Is it just people just getting together in assemblies and a business and an organization? I'm cool with that. If it's all voluntary, I'm cool with it. But you know what? It's not government. It's anarchy. So that's that. That's me summing up this way the power is supposed to flow. Just again, keep in mind that some people might not participate in the assemblies. They might not give them any credence. They might just want to live their life completely free, away from every form of authority and club and group, and just live their life because, hey, they're entitled to it. It's their life. And for us to say, well, no, they have to contribute, then I think that's an issue. Now, maybe if we feel like they're not contributing anything to society, we might want to hold them accountable and ask, like, hey, what are you doing about this, and what are you doing about that, right? And provide some moral judgment on that behalf, and that person probably, hopefully, has some moral judgment on their own behalf to say, yeah, maybe I should do something, but they're not obligated to be compelled or coerced into doing anything against their own will. The decision is still theirs to make. And that's the difference. So, again, if it's all voluntary, I'm all cool with it. This is just my critiques and criticisms and my reminders to the future generations, to anybody who is going to get involved with the assembly. Do not forget natural law. Do not forget statism. And look into the resources that I have in the description below. Thank you very much for watching. My name is Cory Edmund Endrulat. Nature is the answer.